So thank you all for coming. I know most of you and have had multiple conversations with a lot of you about government funding, but we wanted to take this time to kind of take a step back and do government funding 101 broad strokes. You know, I talked to a lot of you about broadband funding, but government funding across the board has a lot of similarities. So we just kind of want to take a step back and talk about government funding from a high level basics kind of point of view. And so, Caitlin, if you can go to the next slide. We will have a focus on grants, but we are going to first talk about, there's basically 3 buckets of funding. The first bucket of funding is called direct funds. And so these direct funds can typically come out of appropriations. They come out of the legislation out of Congress, and they are earmarked for specific programs or specific agencies or the counties. And they're, direct funds that are just simply put forward for a simple purpose to a direct group. Then the second bucket of funding is incentives. Incentives usually come in the form of tax credits or discounts or an incentive type program. If you are looking into tax exemptions or tax credits, the best idea would be to go talk to a tax consultant or your CPA about those specific programs. These incentive programs are usually very narrow in scope and very targeted for a specific purpose. An example of this, of an incentive program might be, a while back there was Cash for Clunkers. Had a very specific set of qualifications. You had to have a certain income bracket, a certain type of car, and it was paid out on a predetermined amount. And it was an incentive. You either qualified or you didn't qualify. So that's what those kind of programs typically look like. And then the third and final type of funding are loans and grants. And this is mainly where our conversation will be focused today, because these are the ones that we sort of have the most control or involvement over. They can be complex to apply for, but they can be lucrative in terms of obtaining funding for a project that you want to complete. They are typically competitive. They are sometimes based on a formula. There can be loan and grant combination programs or reimbursement programs. You have to be an eligible entity in order to apply. And so going through the next couple of slides, we'll talk about in a little bit more detail grant programs. So here you can see kind of grant basics, grant 101. Obviously, grants are funds that don't have to be repaid, but it is highly appealing because like I said, you can get your project paid for, but they do have strict eligibility and compliance requirements. There's also usually a match required, so do not expect your entire project to be funded. And we will talk more about matching requirements here in a little bit. And there are typically 2 types of grants, competitive and formula grants. And then the next slide, we will go into the difference between those 2. A note here is that grant funds are generally taxable. So be sure to keep that in mind as you are pursuing grant funds. And then on the side here, you can see the outline of, where do grants come from? So first, a funding program is going to start in Congress. It could be at the House or the Senate, and they're going to present a possible grant program or funding program as a bill. And you might see that in the news of this new program or new grant has been proposed. Well, don't get your hopes too high, because it then has to be voted on and approved by both the House and both the Senate, and then finally signed into law by the president. So my team researches a lot of these programs in that sort of legislation stage, and we're hopeful that X, Y, and Z program is going to get passed and get through, but we don't count our chickens until the eggs are hatched, and we wait until the president actually signs it into law, because as you know, with government, a lot of things can change in the meantime. So once it is signed into law, then that program goes to the agency. And so then the agency creates and designs the rules for that government funding program, and they manage the application process and the disbursement of those funds. So that's kind of just at a high level, starting from Congress, going all the way through to the agency and to you, the applicant, who may be interested in that, applying for that funding. And so now we're going to look at generally the two different types of grants. We have formula grants and competitive grants. So formula grants are if you meet the benchmarks and you meet the qualifications and you qualify, you are eligible, you get that grant funding based on a predetermined formulated amount. If you don't meet the eligibility criteria, you don't meet the mark, you don't qualify. These are, another example here would be the notorious BEAD funding that's coming down in the broadband space. So BEAD is kind of a combination of formula and competitive. So in the sense for BEAD, it's formula because all 50 states are eligible. All 50 states have submitted their intention to participate. So therefore, all 50 states get that $100 million. That's a formula grant. They will get additional money based on a formula of the new FCC maps. So in that sense, the BEAD grant is a formula grant. And then the second stage of BEAD becomes competitive. So a competitive grant is when you may qualify, but you have to compete against other applicants, and there's going to be scoring involved, and whoever has the best project, whoever meets the program objectives the most, you're going to have selective winners. You're going to have some projects that are better than others, hence why it's competitive. The other note here is that winning a competitive grant does not guarantee you're getting full 100% funding. Again, a match requirement may be involved. So some key things to know and keep in mind as you are looking at these government funding programs are eligibility. Do you qualify? Are you an eligible entity? Is your project an eligible project? Compliance. A lot of these programs will have compliance requirements. So Davis-Bacon is the fair labor laws and making sure any contractors or work that you are using for your project meet the fair labor laws. The NEPA requirements are the environmental requirements that you'll have to meet the compliance for environmental reviews. BABA is Build America, Buy America. So making sure that the materials that you build or buy are American certified, and you'll have to meet those compliance requirements for the grant program. And then also, do you meet the financial and performance benchmarks that are required of the program? Are you a financially stable company that can handle a large government grant coming into your door? Does the project that you are fulfilling meet the performance benchmarks? Can you bring, we're in the broadband space, can you bring the broadband speed that is required of the program with the project that you have at hand and the equipment and the engineering that you have? If you're doing another type of project, if you're doing a research-based type project, does your research, meet the performance requirements and the technical requirements of the grant? And then financing. So most grants require matching funds from other sources in order to participate. Sometimes you will receive more points on your application, the more match and the more funds you bring in. And then documentation. Do you have everything you need? Do you have audited financials? We're seeing that a lot with grants nowadays of requiring audited financials or reviewed financials or quotes, all the documentation that you need in order to apply. And then exemptions. Some grants will set aside funds for underprivileged communities. And are you taking advantage of those exemptions that you might be eligible for? So now we're going to break down the process over the next couple of slides, detailing a couple more of these points, as well as looking at kind of the overview process of the grant flow. So eligibility, again, determining if the program is a good fit for you in terms of, are you an eligible entity? So the rules that you may look at for a possible program you're interested in will list eligible entities. You want to make sure with 100% certainty that you meet that qualification, that you are an eligible entity and you fit the qualifications of the program. You also want to make sure that you're selecting the right project. Is it the right location? Is it the right scope of project? And that you are meeting those rules and requirements based on the rules that the agency has set out. And then documenting this eligibility and showing with proof and documentation that you meet these eligibility requirements. Now, we have meeting the eligibility requirements, and then you also have meeting the capability. Do you have the capability as a company? Do you have the proven track record of management, your staff? Do they have experience implementing projects of this size and scope? Do you have the financial experience and the financial whereabouts to be able to qualify to manage a project of this size. And then project design. So once you figure out, okay, yeah, I'm eligible, I have a project that would fit the scope and fit the rules. Now you're going to design a project to be able to get a grant fund for. So this may require certification from engineers or lawyers, or some technical experts may need to be involved in designing your project. But you'll want to make sure that you're meeting the goals of the program and what the agency has set out for the purpose of the grant. Your design typically influences your budget. And so you'll want to gather any sort of documentation, if it's quotes or internal labor estimates, whatever is needed in order to build that budget for you to apply to that grant. And then here we can talk about matching funds. So matching funds are typically required with grants. They can range from 20% to 50% of the award amount. And they're going to want to see, they can either have cash match requirements or in-kind match requirements, which is, more of offering your equipment or your services or any sort of assets that your company has could be offered as an in-kind match requirement to the program. And that just shows that you are financially investing yourself into the program, you're financially invested into the project, so you will, fulfill your project that you're saying you're going to do. So once you have your project design and your budget, you start getting your application together, then you're going to submit. So nearly all applications now are online via an online portal. So it's important, you have to set up accounts, you'll have to set up accounts to apply, and then also to be able to receive payment. And we always recommend to start early. The government is notorious for having clunky or complex software systems that have issues. They may crash at the very last minute. If they get bombarded with 100 applicants trying to file at the very last minute, they can crash. So making sure that you're in there early and you're getting all of your documentation into the portal and not waiting until the last minute. And it's also important to be aware of your deadlines. So knowing when the funding announcement was released and announced, when the application window is. If you're late, they won't accept it. You have to be on time. On occasion, there's extensions, but you can never, ever count on them. And then the RFI response time. An agency, we'll talk about that in the next slide, but an agency may ask for a request for information, and you only have 2 to 5 business days to respond to them. So knowing when that deadline is, knowing when any project milestones are, as you're making your plan, as you're making your budget, that's going to influence your project plan. And then when your project needs to be completed by is an important deadline to obviously be aware of. And so like I said, once you have submitted your application, the next phase is the cure phase or the RFI phase. Every agency kind of calls it something different, but this is where your application is under review and you may receive a request for information from the agency or the state, whatever application you're applying to. So the government agency running the program will ask you a couple of questions. They might ask you to revise your project plan, revise your budget, revise a specific narrative to include a little bit more detail. This is normal. It's not something to be alarmed by. It's not something to say, oh no, I didn't win because I got an RFI. They do this across the board all the time, and it's kind of a second chance for you to provide additional details that maybe weren't included in the first go round because the agency wasn't clear in what they were asking, and you get a second chance. So you have an opportunity to correct any of those points, make any adjustments to your application. Sometimes these RFIs can be very detailed and very involved, which is sometimes frustrating, but again, it helps you make adjustments and changes so that you aren't completely disqualified. And then hopefully all goes well and you are awarded the funds. Something to note here that we talk to all of our clients about is do not start your project until after the awards are announced. There are many of concerns with supply chain. People are wanting to order fiber or conduit or any sort of materials to stay ahead of the supply chain game, which I understand and I respect. However, if you do that, those costs will not be reimbursed under the grant, and you'd be out those costs and have to pay those costs out of pocket. So anything that you do for the project, you cannot purchase, buy, or do anything until after those awards are announced. And then along the way, you have milestones and monitoring reports that will be needed to submit to the agency, showing and documenting again that you are making progress on your project. You're following the compliance, the NEPA, the BABA, the Davis-Bacon sort of compliance rules we talked about, and you're meeting those guidelines. You'll have to show financials. You'll have to show them every single penny that you have spent on government funding, and document essentially everything along the way. And then I wanted to take a minute to talk about how does that payment happen? How do those funds actually get into your bank account? It could be in a couple of different ways, depending on how the agency runs their program. So you might be paid out in milestones, which is, when you've reached a certain benchmark in the project or the program, you will get a certain percentage of your grant amount. It could also be reimbursement. This is when you have to purchase the equipment, purchase the service, purchase whatever you need, and then you submit the invoice to the agency for how much you actually paid, and then you get reimbursed that invoice. The other grant payment option would be a schedule fund distribution, where they're paid on a schedule. It's based on a calendar date, and they say by X date, it could be quarterly, it could be biannually, you get X number of dollars based on a schedule. And then finally, another one we've seen, this is with the most recent NTI Middle Mile program, is funds can be withdrawn as needed from an ASAP account. And so that's a specific government account where they put your grant amount into this account, and you can withdraw those funds when you are ready to pay a vendor. So let's say you withdraw $100,000 to be able to pay your vendor, and you can do that. You just have to pay that vendor within 30 days of withdrawing those funds. So that one option is nice because you don't have to front the cash. In the reimbursement type program, you have to front the cash and bring that cash up front and then get reimbursed for it. So it's important to know how the grant is going to pay you so that you know how to be prepared. And then just a side note here about a block grant. A block grant is a lump sum of funding that's given to a smaller governing body. So for example, funding that could be given to a county for schools, and then the county gets to determine how those funds are used, whether it be towards new buses or lunch program or curriculum. So that's just a different type of grant that does exist. If you hear the word block grant, that's how those work. So that now that you have received payment and you have moved along in your project, your program, maybe it's been 2 years, maybe it's been 5 years, you must complete your project as you promised in your original application and follow all of the compliance rules and all of the milestones and benchmarks and complete and do what you said you would do. If you don't, your funding could be revoked and you could be asked to give those funds back. So it's important that you stay true to your word and true to your application. And then along the way, like I said, you may have quarterly or biannual reports that you will have to provide the agency. And then at the completion of your project, you will have a final closeout report that is required by the program. And you'll have to say how you met all of the program needs and goals of the program and show all the documentation and all of the things. Some programs do require reporting even 2 to 3 years after the program completion. So something to just keep in mind and make sure you're taking a look at the rules. How much reporting are we going to have to do if we do win this grant? And then obviously, with any government funding, you're going to want to keep your records for years and years to come, because they do have the right to come in and audit you and see, exactly what you spent your funds on. And so that's kind of the whole grant process. Now I want to take a step back and just review it all at a very high level. So these numbers here are years. So let's say generally this is, the flow of a grant program. In the first year, the agency is going to announce the rules and publish the rules. Sometimes they have a period of comment where you can comment on the rules. Once those rules are released, then the application window opens. So you can see these steps here are done by the agency. These steps down here are by the applicant. And so then about year 2, an applicant can submit during the application window. Application windows are typically open for 1 to 4 months. Obviously, if it's only a 1-month window, you either have to be very prepared and ready to go by the time the application window opens, or you have to be very prepared to move quickly. A 1-month application window is very short. So making sure you know those deadlines and know what to expect. And then once your application is submitted, the agency will screen those applications, send out any requests for additional information, and kind of review your application. Then the applicant will have the opportunity to respond to those RFIs, and then awards will be announced, and then you will have X number of years to complete that project. Projects can range anywhere from 1 year to 4 years to 5 years, again, depending on the rules of that program. So this is just kind of high-level overview of the process from start to finish. So now that you know the process, you know where legislation starts, how funding comes to be about, how it gets dispersed, how you can access it, what do we do now? And especially as a lot of people are preparing for 2023, what can you do now to try to find your grant opportunities and kind of explore this space to take advantage of it? Well, first we recommend to do your research. Look at, projects that might fit your company's needs and your company's goals. There could be federal programs, there could be state level programs. Looking at those 2 different sources, we recommend looking at grants.gov. That is where all of the grants, federal grants live. You can explore grants.gov as an opportunity. And then if you have a specific industry you're looking at, for example, broadband, there are specific broadband grants and broadband grant opportunities, as well as many others. So looking up your specific agency and looking up those grants, or looking up your specific industry and the grants that apply to you. And then, as hopefully you have learned, gather all of the documentation. You will need all sorts of documentation in order to apply, making sure that your organization's finances are together. If you need audited financials, that is a component that can take 10 to 14 weeks and can come at a cost. So it's something that you need to prepare and think about if you are serious about applying for grants. Getting audited financials might be something that needs to happen, as well as getting quotes from vendors, getting real-time quotes from them of what the pricing situation looks like. With inflation, prices may have changed from 6 months ago. So getting updated and accurate quotes in order to build your budgets. And also, Vitality is here to help. So this is, what we do day in and day out is we help applicants from the start to finish, trying to find the program that fits your needs, the grant program, or whatever sort of government funded program to fit your project, make sure that you're an eligible entity, guide you through the application process. We do the application writing and submission. We do the compliance consultation. We help with invoice reimbursement, all the reporting and compliance components that come with winning a government grant. So we are here to help, shall you need it. And then finally is our contact page. So by somehow I've done this all in 27 minutes to leave us plenty of time for questions. But here is a contact page so you know where to find me. You can click on that link for my calendar, follow me on LinkedIn. I'm constantly trying to post about the news in the industry and what sort of upcoming programs are available. And you can also visit our widelli.com/funding page to learn more about the programs we're following and the documents that we've created to help people navigate the space and understand specific programs. We also have a new events page. It's widelli.com/events. If you want to follow our event schedule so you can be notified of webinars and events, whether in person or virtual, you can do that as well. So I am now going to open it up to questions. I hope you all learned something today that was new about government funding, but yeah, what sort of questions do we have? Could be specific or general.
So Brooke, could you, this is Dave Yorty, could you elaborate a little bit on the in-kind match for matching funds?
Yeah, so it's going to depend on the specific rules of the program that you're looking at. But in general, in-kind funds are going to be any sort of asset that your company has that you could put towards the project. So if we're talking, since I know you're in the broadband business, if we're talking broadband, an example could be a middle mile IRU. If you're doing a last mile project, you could use a middle mile IRU as an in-kind match to say, hey, I'm contributing this. My company is paying and buying this IRU so that we can make these last mile connections happen for my project. And that could be used as any sort of asset that your company has that can be essentially applied. Something that your company is doing and providing towards the project that isn't necessarily cash, but an asset of value that you can kind of put towards the grant or the project.
So it doesn't really give you an opportunity to reduce your cash. Well, you are reducing your cash component, but you have to buy the IRU. So in essence, you're still funding it through operations. There's no way around kind of the cash one way or cash another way component.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. Is it could be more of your operational costs are going to be your in-kind, because you cannot fund your operational costs with a grant.
Right.
For broadband, at least, your grant is going to be more infrastructure and construction costs, not operation costs. So those operation costs are going to be more in-kind, things that your company is contributing to the project, things that you're bringing to the table.
Okay.
Brooke, if they have spares that they wanted to put toward it that they already owned, would that count as in kind?
When you say spares, can you elaborate spares?
So if there's equipment, like they have some RRUs and they're just sitting in a warehouse and they're being used as spares, but they decide that they don't need that many spares and they can actually use it towards a project, then would that be in kind? Could that be a way for them to save money in the sense that they don't have to buy them brand new?
Yes. Yeah. So it would be, you would have to use it for your specific project, though. The grant and the project that you are applying for, you have to use that material and those things towards that specific project, and you would have to document that. And it would be something, because like I said, you don't want to purchase anything prior to award announcement. But if it's something that you've already had in the past that your company will just contribute towards the project, yes, that could work.
Thanks.
Great question.
Hey, Brooke, I had a question about the auditing of the taxes. So we don't normally have our taxes audit. Is that like a specific type of thing that we ask for from our current CPA?
It could be. I would not advise to do it unless you have to, because it can cost thousands and thousands of dollars. So if it's a program that you really want to apply for, you think you would be successful at, and they require it, then you would need to, or you can't. Don't waste your time applying. However, some programs do have workarounds. So they may ask for 2 years of audited financials, but you could submit reviewed financials as an alternative. Another
Okay.
program I was looking at the other day said your CEO or your CFO could sign off saying that your financial statements were accurate and up to date, and that would suffice in lieu of an audited financials. So some programs do offer alternatives. So that's always one of the first things I look for when looking through the rules of a program. If they require audited financials, making sure, the client knows that up front, because if they don't have them, then it's going to take, like I said, 10 to 14 weeks, as well as be a significant investment. But if it's something that's worthwhile, and it might be worth your money to get the audited financials, it might be something to consider.
Thank you.
And you should also be aware that some programs are going to require you to get an independent CPA. So if you have a CPA that's working in-house for you, then those audited financials may not qualify.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So make sure you check in with the rules and see what the restrictions are, because you don't want to waste time getting audited financials that are not going to count.
Thank you.
Sure.